I think we're going to get started. A warm welcome to everyone who's joining us on this live webinar on the EPSO AST3 Finance competition. And we seem to have some issues, at least on my end, with the chat. And I hope that's only me and not others. So I'd like to be sure that everyone can see the chat. And if there is any problem with the live chat, we'll run the webinar just as we had planned. But the live questions, it's easier than if you send a message to support@eutraining.eu. And that's like the backup. But apparently it seems to be only on my end. And I got confirmation that it works for most of you. But again, if anyone has any concerns with the chat and with the live questions, you send a message to support@eutraining.eu. So with that, a warm welcome. And we have a lot of materials to cover about this relaunch of the competition, the AST3 Finance, which was actually announced a couple of days ago last week, but we couldn't do a webinar right after. But we are here right now to present everything to you. In terms of sound check and technical problems or issues, hopefully there will be none. If you have any concerns or something doesn't work on your end, you can start with a different browser, and there's also an app for Click Meeting, and this is the event code, the event ID that you might want to write down, and then you can certainly tune in. So with that, let's get started. I will not bore you with my background, and you might know my work with EU Training, with the Ultimate EU Textbook, and also staying with the housekeeping part. We have the recording that we are going to share with you after the event, and then the slides as well will be sent to you shortly after the conclusion of the event. But certainly being here at the live event has the benefit of you being able to ask questions, which will be fed to me because I don't see the live chat, but certainly I will have it at the secondary channel. And then we can certainly follow up with you in some shape or form with the questions that we may not have enough time to answer, because we will be very keen on answering all the questions that you put to us, but I'll do my best to cover everything in this 1 hour that we have ahead of us. So with that, few words about EU Training. Some of you may not know, others may be very familiar with the services and the help we are providing to EPSO candidates. So we have a very robust community with lots of engagement on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on different platforms. And I encourage you to follow us on these platforms. We have newsletters. And then we have a huge question database that cover all aspects of EU exams and EPSO exams. The two are not necessarily fully overlapping because there are quite a few internal competitions that the different EU institutions organize. But at the same time, most candidates, and presumably most of you, would be interested in the open competitions, which are run by the European Personnel Selection Office, or EPSO. And we have also a lot of training and teaching materials in the shape of webinars that many participants have used, and we keep adding those. The one today we're having is among them, but certainly there are many others on methodology and different aspects. So with that, let's take a look at the competition, the EPSO AST 156 of 2024. And the competition is an interesting one. It's new, but not new, because it's the relaunch of an exam that was launched last year, and then it was suspended, canceled. And now here we go again, that it's open and it's ready to take candidates. So what are the number of positions available? This is all based on the notice of competition, which many of you must have read or must have seen. But we're going to walk you through the different aspects and give you further context and further background information to be sure that you are fully aware of all the intricacies and the nuances of the exam. There are a lot of positions available. There are essentially 3 subdomains or 3 areas that you need to choose from. You can only choose one of these. So one is financial management, the other one is accounting and treasury, and then public procurement. And the largest certainly is the financial management, which is a fairly broad area. And we'll see the different requirements about the background, about the qualifications, about the work experience that you're expected to have. But then again, all 3 are available. You need to pick one of them. But given the sheer number of places on the reserve list, which is what these numbers show, reserve list meaning after you have successfully completed all steps of the competition, you become eligible for recruitment. And for those of you who are new to this field, just to be sure you understand the terminology, where selection and recruitment are separate things. Selection is what the European Personnel Selection Office, so EPSO, does. They put you through these tests, these exams that you need to pass, and you have the actual recruitment, which is later, and EPSO is not directly involved in that. It's the specific EU institutions, European Commission, Committee of the Regions, European Court of Auditors, any other that can hire you on the basis of your presence on the reserve list. So the total number of places is very large. Now, how many of those on the reserve list will actually get recruited? That's kind of an open question, and that's in transition. So certainly not 100%. So there's still an important part after you have succeeded in the competitions to actually get hired. We have a dedicated webinar on what you can do to make yourself visible in the eyes of the recruiters and find vacancies in the institutions. But obviously, the institutions themselves, they do not launch open competitions of the kind that we are looking at right now without having very specific hiring needs of the new recruitees that you will become. So question is, where will you work? Well, most likely in Brussels or Luxembourg, depending on which institution hires you in the end, because the European Commission has certain DGs, Directors General, in Luxembourg, whereas the European Court of Auditors is by default based in Luxembourg. So there are essentially these two cities, these two places where you are almost certainly going to end up in your work. In terms of activities, or in terms of the content of the job, what will you do? So for the financial management, there are indicators, there are pointers as to the job profile. And these are listed in a notice of competition. Similarly, for the accounting and treasury, again, some indications and hints there. And the same thing for public procurement of what the job entails. That has a certain impact on what sort of profiles and what sort of background and experience they are seeking. And there is more detail on that. And we'll look at that to some degree. But again, we're not going to go into extreme depth. And also knowing that all of you are coming from very diverse backgrounds, work experience, have different degrees, it's hard to truly go into any particular person's profile or any particular person's work history or education history and to say, are you eligible? Are you a better fit for the accounting and treasury? Or should you perhaps go to financial management? Here's what I say. Always consider the formal criteria. What formal criteria do you meet? Do you fulfill those to be sure that you are not disqualified, that you are considered eligible? And if you have the luxury to qualify for more than one area, for more than one field, that's when some dilemma actually comes in. When you say, should I go for accounting and treasury? Should I go for financial management, given my background, given my profile? So with that, if you have that luxury of qualifying for more than one field, that's when a bit of the numbers game comes in, because you will look at how many places are there on your reserve list. But again, there's the big unknown of how many candidates are going to apply for one particular field, and that it's always the proportion that matters and not so much the absolute number of the number of places on the reserve list. But that has a certain bearing on your thinking if you can choose between multiple fields. Right, and I see that there's one question coming in. Let me just jump on that. I'll answer that right away. So in the application form, they ask if we're willing to work in EU delegations and other places. Are the answers binding? If not, what's the purpose? I don't think the answer is binding. It's not that you need to commit 6 months, 8 months, 1 year in advance before you passing the competition and being recruited. At that point, you don't give 100% full commitment to say, yes, I'm willing to go to Zimbabwe because the delegation needs their financial officer. So this is more of an indication when they have the reserve list and the hiring offices, so those heads of unit or heads of department or whoever is in charge of filling a vacancy is looking at the reserve list and say, okay, I need an AST3 financial officer in my delegation for that matter. Let me just do a filter among those candidates who indicated that they would consider such position. And in that case, you would be contacted. But if you say, listen, I have my entire life set up in Brussels for that matter, because you are already here for one reason or another, and you really have no intention to go to a delegation, you will probably indicate that in the application. So I can't imagine this being binding. This is a strong indicator as to your willingness to move to a delegation if such position opens up there. Right. In terms of eligibility, so there are objective criteria and there are more subjective, or let me put it, more personal criteria that you need to meet. Objectively speaking, you need to have an EU citizenship. You need to have fulfilled military service requirements, if that is a compulsory requirement in your particular country. And you need to meet the character requirements that are necessary for a position, in case, not just generally speaking, that you're not a convicted criminal, but also some positions may require security clearance or other checks because you might deal with highly sensitive data, financial, political, business, or other. So these are fairly easy to meet or to fulfill. And then you have the specific requirements, which relate to the languages and the qualifications and the work experience. So let's talk a little bit about each of these two. Well, before that, there is the EZ, which is a wonderful acronym. So that's the, let me actually pull up the next slide. So the EZ is the Experience Assessment Survey Instrument. So that's what EZ stands for, where this is a non-binding check that you are required or strongly encouraged, but perhaps even required during the application process to fill out. Now, what purpose does it serve? It serves to filter out candidates who are manifestly ineligible for a certain position or who are just not a fit in formal objective terms. So to say, do you enjoy full rights as a citizen of a member state of the EU? Well, if you have, I don't know, Japanese citizenship, but no EU citizenship, that you're not going to qualify. So it's a very lightweight first filter to make sure that the candidates who apply really meet the most basic formal criteria. So you need to fill this out. This is not a big deal. Now, let's look at bigger deals, which are the languages. So you must know at least 2 official EU languages, and this is an interesting new development. Some of you who have been following EPSO competitions may be familiar with a different linguistic regime where you had to know one of the 24 languages and then a second language or something. The first language had to be English, French, or German. And this is not the case anymore. The case that we have right now is a 24-23 regime. And that basically means that you need to pick a language 1, which is a minimum C1 level. So it's a almost mother tongue. So fluent level of one of the 24 official EU languages, which is not related to the citizenship. So me as a Hungarian-Belgian dual citizen, I can choose Estonian. Now, I would not choose Estonian because I don't speak a word of Estonian. But that's to demonstrate that my citizenship has nothing to do with my language choice. Number 2, language 2 can be any of the 23 remaining EU official languages. So with my previous example, let's say a more realistic one, I could choose language 1 Hungarian, language 2. I'm trying to give you demonstrate a good example of a language that is not so mainstream, so to say. Take Estonian. So I could choose Hungarian Estonian because what I want to demonstrate with this example is that I don't need to choose English or French or German or Italian or Spanish, which are typically the 5 most widely spoken languages, and especially as second languages of candidates. You can basically choose any combination as long as the 2 are different. And any of the 24 official languages. And that's somewhat of a strange development, and partly or almost exclusively linked to legal challenges that EPSO faced, because the Commission or some member states, and I'm looking at you, France, and I'm looking at you, Italy, and I'm looking at you, a couple others, who challenged the linguistic regime that they had, and they said, well, it violates the equality of the languages and certain democratic principles and other things, and some competitions were canceled or called into question as a result. So legally speaking, this is a bulletproof system where any language of the 24 official can be chosen. From practical perspective, obviously, you will need to speak and be able to communicate in English and or French and or another main EU language. But certainly English and French are the primary working languages of the institutions. So even if you pass your competitions in choosing Czech and Slovak or Maltese and Swedish, no matter what combination, practically speaking, at the hiring, at the recruitment part, you will need to speak one of those main working languages. And then qualifications. This is where it gets tricky. And I know from experience, and even though I don't see the live chat, I do have from my colleagues the feeding in of the filtered relevant questions that are coming in. I know many of you would be wondering about this and saying, okay, does my qualification make me eligible? And if so, which profile or which field should I choose? Now, again, with the caveat, I can tell you, based on the many personal circumstances and background of who qualifies and who doesn't, but consider these principles and look at it from a critical perspective, that if you were the selection board, and the selection board is the group of officials who basically are responsible for a particular competition like this one. So EPSO is the umbrella, but there are specific independent selection boards under that framework who run the competitions. And it's those officials and individuals in the selection board who can ultimately make those judgments and say, okay, this person meets the criteria or that this person does not. So in terms of qualifications for all three profiles, there are some general pointers, which is 2-year university or equivalent of completed 2-year university diploma in the field specified, plus minimum of 3 years of relevant professional experience, right? So it's a dual requirement, but there's an alternative to that, which is a high school degree, but then you need more professional experience. So as long as you have a baccalaureate or an equivalent of that, 6 years relevant professional experience would qualify you for this particular competition. But then again, the big legal caveat that I'm saying here, we're not EPSO, we're not the selection board, we're a private company. Obviously, we do everything we can to be as accurate as possible, but for particular circumstances and specific issues, I encourage you to look at the notice of competition, evaluate that. We can give you certain guidance as to general piece of advice, but again, whatever we might say is not going to be binding, and we cannot predict that. If you have a borderline case where, okay, it's in the gray zone because you have 5 years and 8 months and another 4 months of experience, but that was an unpaid internship before you got your high school degree, that may not qualify you because it doesn't meet all those formalities. So that is to say that these are the general principles, general rules. And then there are a couple other pointers in the notice of competition where they talk about the professional experience being relevant, because that's another very, I'd say, sensitive or sometimes subject to interpretation kind of term. What is a relevant experience? So if I volunteered in a charity, but not necessarily as a financial assistant, but as someone who would help out in a soup kitchen, it's a nice thing to do, but it's not considered relevant. So it could be the workplace, it could be the job, the actual task that you did, and generally speaking, you need to prove it. So with some formal way, and it's required that it has to be paid. Now, if it's paid, then you are supposed to have some formal papers or documents that can prove it. And so the principle here that they share is that it was acquired in one or more of the areas that are specific to your field. as listed in the notice of competition, and it was acquired after having fulfilled the education requirement. So if you did highly specific, say, accounting or procurement related tasks while you were 16, but you didn't have your high school degree yet, chances are it's not going to qualify or not going to count towards the experience that you need to prove. So before I go to this one, I see there are a couple of questions coming in, and here's one question which I'm not sure I understand. Is does a BUC, which is I guess a baccalaureate, +2 diploma work? I guess I would need to understand more about the context, because a baccalaureate, so a high school degree plus 6 years of relevant work experience, that would qualify you. So whether or not you have those degrees, as long as you have the working professional experience, that seemed to qualify you. All right, and then another one, I have Master in European Studies, 5 years of relevant professional experience. Am I eligible for public procurement? Well, European Studies, I'm not sure that would be considered as related to the field. So in that case, on the face of it, and again, I'm in the middle of a live webinar and I can't give you right like that a quick evaluation. The very first impression I have, it may not, because 5 years is less than 6. And the underlying degree is more generic and not topic or field specific. But then again, I need to understand more to give you a more conclusive answer. And maybe one more question that I just quickly pick up. So does a master in EU law and general law qualify for public procurement? That I would tend to think it's closer. So public procurement is much closer to law than general European studies. So for instance, I did European public administration studies in Bruges. That is still not as relevant as maybe European law as it is, I mean, to the public procurement angle. So again, on the face of it, it looks like it qualifies closer, but then again, would need to understand more. And also European law, there are quite many permutations and differences there. So maybe if you specialized in procurement or adjacent fields versus, say, competition law, that seems more relevant. But again, need to understand the nuances there. Why this is a great opportunity? Probably I don't need to preach to convert it, but just for the record to say, so there are very good health insurance benefits once you are an EU official. European schools are available for your kids, providing education in basically in all the EU official languages and according to those curricula. And there are obviously an important aspect are the salaries. On our website, on eutraining.eu, so we have a salary calculator, which is freely available. So you can go there and it gives you a rough idea, a rough indication of how much your potential salary would be. And if I could ask my colleagues just to move the cursor off the screen, because it's a bit disturbing me as it moves around, would be great. And so with that, so salary calculator, you can go on the website and feed in the different variables, which we did just for the sake of it, a quick simulation, but there are more details to it that you can provide, whether you are based in Brussels right now, which grade do you have, what salary step you would be, which you don't necessarily need to know, but it largely depends on your work experience, whether you have children or not. And there are other things. So a rough estimation here would be 3,900 euros net salary based on these variables. But I think we didn't input any kids. So again, depends on your own circumstances and whether you move into Brussels or to a place of employment specifically from elsewhere, because that has an impact on the expat allowance and things like that. So with that, let's move on and look at the actual EPSO competition phases. What are the different steps that you need to take and you need to pass, you need to fulfill in order to land on the reserve list? Right, so the application process starts with the first step, which is filling in all the data, filling in all the information on the EPSO website as a candidate, and that you can actually to submit in any of the 24 official languages. And you can actually upload the documents a little later. So you don't necessarily need to have all the documents at hand at the time when you send in your application, because you can have it, as we will see, a a little later. I think it's October, but we have a slide on that. We'll see the exact date. This is fairly straightforward. Some candidates tend to ask, should I do my application? Should I fill in my application in English or in another language? If you're really comfortable in English, do that in English. Perhaps it's easier to look at it, to process it, to analyze it later in the recruitment stage, when those who look at the reserve list and they have a hiring power, so to say, they have a hiring responsibility and they get access to the database, might be easier. But then again, it has no practical bearing on the selection part and on your chances of succeeding. So again, for practical purposes, might be easier in English or French or Italian or Spanish, one of the larger languages. But again, it's just for a much later stage where it might have some benefits. When to apply? Before the 3rd of September. So make sure that your summer holidays, you don't forget about it. You don't leave it to the last moment. Always make sure that you do it, and you can do it fairly early. You can do a draft and save it, and you can come back to it later. But by all means, make sure to send it in. And if you're in a different time zone, 3rd of September, I think it's midday, and that's Brussels time. So depending on where you are, don't mess up that little bit. So here's the slide on the document upload, where supporting documents need to be uploaded before the 15th of October. So that is a more flexible system where you might be able to get hold of a degree or an employment record or any kind of certification. It takes a bit more time, and you may not be able to do that in the middle of summer because former employers are hard to find and other practical considerations. So they give that flexibility where you can do that by the middle of October and send it in as long as you have those. What are the actual tests? And this is probably the most important practical side of it. Aside from everything we've covered so far, what specific tests do you need to take and what you need to pass to succeed? So it's pretty straightforward, though there are some twists, and there's one surprise of sorts, especially for those of you who have been looking at EPSO exams and following the selection process for some time. So computer-based tests, reasoning skills, essentially the abstract verbal numerical reasoning skills. These are pretty classic. We refer to them as CBT, meaning computer-based tests, even though all the tests are now computer-based, because there is a dedicated day and time slot when you need to sit those tests. And it seems to be that it's the same time for everyone. So again, I don't yet know whether that's going to be the case, though developments are pointing towards that direction, where all candidates sit the exams in the exact same time frame on a specific day. And that can be a little tricky because if you are in the Western Hemisphere, or so to say, in the Americas, or if you're in Asia, and again, depending where in Asia, or if you happen to be in Australia at the time of the exam, that can be a bit tricky of waking up early or staying up very late. But they try to bear that in mind. And of course, the vast majority of candidates are Europe-based, but still, it's somewhere midday-ish, because there's one exam coming up in September, not for this competition, but for a separate one, where they timed the exam to bear in mind different time zones as well. So the point is, every test that we will cover here, it's computer-based, though historically, or our inner jargon means we're just referring to the abstract verbal numerical reasoning skill test as CBT, as computer-based tests. And then you have the field-related MCQ, meaning multiple choice quiz. These are, as the name suggests, you need to pick one correct answer out of 4, perhaps 5, but usually out of 4, related to the field, related to one of the 3 fields in this particular competition. And then you have this novelty, which is called EUFTE. I think EPSO just loves abbreviation. They themselves are a big abbreviation of as EPSO, as the 4-letter institution, or rather service. In legal sense, they are a service that everybody seems to know. And now here's another abbreviation to learn and to memorize and to be aware of EUFD, that's EU Free Text Essay. So EU Free Text Essay, which is basically a written test. And I'll say a few words about that because this is the first time we're seeing this particular exam type used in a competition. Now, as I said before, just as a reminder, so everything is online, everything is remotely procured. That means that there is no test center or exam center or place where you need to go to. It's on your computer or on a computer that you can get access to, because the computer needs to have admin access. So if it's a work computer, be sure that you have admin access. And if you don't, then you need to get hold of a computer where you can install the app that basically through which you can take the exam. As a side note, we're going to still offer at Ambiorix Center, which is our office in Brussels, space for exam takers. So if you don't have that computer or you need a silent spot, you want to be sure that everything runs smooth, we have that space in Brussels that we rent out for EPSO candidates, and then you can have your computer with the app installed and everything calmly done. So that's just a commercial plug for that kind of service that we run. Though obviously, if the exam happens on the same day at the same time for everyone, we unfortunately cannot cater to more than 3 individuals, because we have 3, perhaps we'll have 4 workstations where you can take the exams. But again, that's just a side note. Regarding the exam itself, so these are essentially the components, and that's what you need to take in that single sitting. There's a short break if you need to go to the bathroom, but essentially it all happens on a single day. And the language is an important part of it, and whether the scoring, what does it look like, whether it's pass or fail, or there's a ranking. So an important part of this, the computer-based test, so the abstract verbal numerical reasoning, it's in language 1. So if you speak multiple languages, you may want to choose a language in which you can master the abstract verbal numerical reasoning, so you can process information, you can understand things quickly and not necessarily express yourself actively in those languages, but it's more about processing information quickly. So that is language 1. And for these tests, it's really a pass-fail mark. So there is no ranking here, though there is a bit of nuance to bear in mind as what passing or failing, where is the threshold drawn. For verbal reasoning, so you have 20 questions and 35 minutes. And again, there's a lot to say about these kind of tests. We have a lot of samples on our website. We have a lot of free webinars and then paid webinars on explaining methodology around this. So I will not go into any particular detail. Similarly, for numerical reasoning, you have 10 questions and 20 minutes. There's a lot to say about how to best master these kind of tests and what are the shortcuts, what are the methods that you can quickly find the right response. And similarly, the abstract reasoning, that tends to be the toughest for most candidates, because it's 10 questions in 10 minutes, and you need to decode, decipher these shapes and determine which one is the next in the sequence. So the scoring is what I mentioned earlier, which can get a little tricky. So for the financial management and accounting and treasury, so field 1 and 2, the pass-fail is calculated as follows. You have the pass mark for the numerical, it's 6 out of 10. So these fields tend to be more numeracy heavy. So the numerical reasoning requires you to pass to reach 60%, essentially. So 6 points out of 10, otherwise you're out. But the verbal and the abstract are combined. So there, the combined pass mark is 15 points out of 30, which means that the verbal reasoning has 20 questions. So theoretically, or well, even practically, you can mess up the entire abstract reasoning and still pass, as long as you have at least 15 verbal reasoning questions answered correctly. That's probably good news, because abstract reasoning, you can afford to lose certain points. Now, you certainly don't want to risk it, but the stakes are not that high as long as you can balance it out. And then for field 3, so for public procurement, the calculation is slightly different, because the verbal reasoning requires you to reach 10 out of 20, and then the numerical and the abstract are combined, which is a bit more difficult, because you could have the perfect score in numerical reasoning and then 0 on abstract and still pass. But it's not that obvious to have the perfect score on numerical reasoning. So for public procurement, it's slightly different. In any case, what is required of you is that you passed, is that you reach the minimum number of points as described in this and the previous slide, where as long as you master it to that degree, you can go to the next stage. What's more tricky and really what counts a lot towards your success, or the lack of it, but hopefully your success, is the field-related multiple choice quiz, where you have 40 minutes and 30 questions. And it's not only that you have a pass mark, but there's even a ranking. So this is done in language 2, and you must be among the highest scoring. So it's not only that you have to pass, but you need to pass with a very good score in this particular test. And this is related, as the name suggests, your knowledge in the field. You are not going to be expected to perform like a hypothetical scenario, to say, you're a public procurement officer, how would you approach this problem? This is not the kind of test that you can expect. And similarly, for other fields, it's not going to be a scenario-based or an open-ended or anything like this. It's about mastering this field. I would say general knowledge, but the word general is a bit misleading. It's knowledge related to your particular field, this particular area, along with the EU aspect. So never discount, never forget that all of this is happening in an EU context. So look at the different Commission Directors General or Court of Auditors or the Commission's internal audit service or whatever other department or institution or other EU body deals with such questions that connect to your field. Look up those sources. So not only what is the knowledge in that particular field, but it's also what is to be known in the European Union context. And then, if all goes well, the written test is going to be scored. So this has an impact on whether they even look at your written test and if the eligibility is checked in the end. Now, there is this new bit, the new kind of test, the EU FTE, and that's a free text essay on EU matters. So let's look at this, what it actually means, because this is a new bit where you may not have heard of this before. Actually, we heard of it, that it was kind of coming, but we haven't seen it being part of a newly launched or relaunched competition. And actually, it's not that complicated, because what we're looking at, it's a written test. So essentially, this is a written test where you're going to have 40 minutes to write an essay, as the name suggests, open essay, based on most likely one question, one open question, one orientation task, if you will. And the scoring is from 0 to 10, so not a very large scoring spectrum. And you need to reach at least 5 points. And the interesting thing is, it's done in language 2, and it's a pass-fail, and it only measures your communication competency. So it's not about your knowledge in the field. And you do get access to the documents in real time. So in real time, sorry, not in real time, ahead of time is what I was going to say. You get access to the document in advance, probably around 10 days, maybe 2 weeks before the exam. EPSO is going to disclose the documents that you can then read, you can analyze, you can process, you can get, dare I say, intimately familiar with. Because at the exam, you get the same document, you get access to the same document, but you will have very limited time. So your familiarity with the document will play a big role, because your answer, even though it's a free text essay, it has to be provided in the context of that background document. So just for the sake of hypothesis, let's say there is an EU report on procurement, if that's your field, And that's the background document that they reveal ahead of time. Or maybe it's more of a mix and match of different kind of background documents of 25, 30 pages, and say, here's a report, here's a press release, here's a parliamentary own initiative resolution, what have you. And then you get familiar with that, but at the exam, you get basically one topic, one assignment to say, argue for or against, or present your thoughts on, or which way is the EU policy on public procurement heading? Very open question. And again, I'm just making it up as I go, but to give you some orientation as to what to expect. And you say, well, based on that background document that you will have analyzed, that you will have understood by that point, you have 40 minutes to share your thoughts. You can make references, you can make certain indicators, or bring in certain facts and figures and different data points, and just simply a good argumentation or a good presentation of your views, if that is what requested of you, because it could be more focused on your analysis, or it could be something broader and not necessarily opinion, but more of a description of what there is. So it could take many directions, but it happens on the basis of the background document. So the most important thing here is it's not measuring your knowledge in the field, it measures your written communication skills. And what that means in practice, because we could have different interpretation what good written communication means. They, meaning EPSO, has on their website, and they are openly communicating about this, they have the competency framework, which they put out some time ago. And written communication has certain indicators. Say this, that the person is able to express themselves clearly, that you back up your arguments with facts. I'm not sure that's actually part of that, but something along those lines. These are all online. These are available. So you get a better understanding of what is expected of you and which evaluation grid will play a role when they assess your written communication. You need to have 5 points at least, and hopefully you pass. This is not a grammar test. This is not a linguistic test in a classic sense. They're not going to look at your grammar. I put in a little footnote there, unless it's just abysmal. If it's really you're misspelling every second word and the text is unreadable and it's full of grammatical errors, that's not going to help. Their primary assessment criteria are not focused on that linguistic aspect, but then again, there has to be some minimum standard that it's not going to hurt the content of what you write. So with that, we basically have all the tests that you need to pass, and those tests are the abstract verbal numerical, the field-related multiple choice quiz, and then the EU free text essay. And all of this happens in the span of 2 hours, 3 hours, roughly that sort of time frame on a computer. There's no interview element. There's no personal live interaction with an assessor or other person. And if everything goes well, and why shouldn't it, that's when they do the eligibility check, when they check your declarations to say, I have the work experience, I have the background, and the degrees, the documents. And then they don't necessarily check for every single candidate who applied. There is this scoring angle and making sure that only those who have passed certain tests and the highest field-rated MCQ scores, there is a bit of workflow there. And it's done in parallel with the written test scoring. And then ultimately, how many candidates are checked. So until not more than 1.5 numbers of successful candidates, because some candidates may prove not to have the right documentation or not to have the right qualification. So it's not that everyone who passes the test will, by definition, qualify to be placed on the reserve list, because their documents or declarations may not make them eligible. And then comes the reserve list. Those who reach the pass marks, highest multiple choice quiz scores, and are deemed eligible based on the declarations and documents are placed on the reserve list. And then you're there. And then the final reserve list is not ranked. So that's an important one. It's an alphabetical order. So it doesn't matter that as long as you meet all the criteria and you pass the scores or reach the scores, you are going to be in the reserve list, and there's no ranking of, this is not the Olympics. And then notification in your EPSO account, and that's when you put the champagne in the fridge, but you don't drink it yet because you need to secure a job. So that's when the phase that I mentioned at the beginning, reserve list, recruitment, are separate in the process. So the recruitment services themselves, they get access to the reserve list, so they can call you up and say, are you available? Can we invite you in for an interview? And that interview, again, it's more of a classic job interview where, say, you have that many people on the reserve list. That service says, okay, your experience is interesting to me. Your language knowledge is interesting to me. Your profile is interesting to me. But there are many other candidates. So that's when they choose who would be the best fit for a particular role. So before I go there, here are some questions that come in. So do you know when the test will take place? No, I don't know when the test will take place. I can work with some assumptions, and those assumptions are basically informed by the following. So for other competitions, so there is one competition for transport professionals, which has already been disclosed. It's happening, the exam is happening on 25th of September. So that is to say, exams are happening with the current provider, which is called TestWe, because they are the ones who run these remotely proctored tests. And that has a certain impact on when competitions like the one in question right now, so when this would be planned. And I think it largely depends on how many candidates there are. And as long as TestWe does a good enough job to provide or to run the remotely run exams technically well and smoothly, as long as that's the case, which it seems to be increasingly the case, then the exam can actually take place relatively soon. And I say relatively soon because if you look at the application deadline being the 3rd of September, again, really take this with a pinch of salt, and I take zero responsibility for my guess, somewhat educated guess. I'd say late October, early November, mid-November. That's what I would guess as a likely exam date. But again, this is not based on more than my logic and intuition, but certainly not on any formal data or even rumors. So again, just a guess. And I see that there are a couple other questions before we look at the last bit, where if I have a master's degree in finance from Solvay, but have 5 years of experience in project management, should I even try to apply? And again, let me just not address it even, because I really don't feel comfortable in a snap to say yes or no, and that's a pretty consequential response. I'd rather just refrain from it. How can we prepare the written test? So that's, I think it's an important question, and many of you are certainly wondering about that. So the written test, essentially, there are two, well, one, but two kind of skills that you can develop to be performing better for the written test. I think one is writing skills. Improving your own writing skills based on some background document or based on some information, and under time pressure to be able to write a sensible flow text, analysis, reply, or other genre, and then maybe have a friend, and certainly we have coaches, we have trainers. By the way, we have a dedicated webinar on the writing skills. So specifically what I'm talking about right now, I run with Thomas, our senior expert. We run a webinar. We have one scheduled for the end of August, and more are coming in September on how to develop your writing muscle. So there's the writing skills in general. And the other skill I find is important to look at in this particular context is more of your analytical skills, of understanding a complex document, of maybe creating some outline, the kind of critical thinking, analysis, turning a hodgepodge of background documents into something that makes sense. It's something that you can use as a reference when you are actually writing a relevant essay in the context of the background document. Now, how to practice that? I think it's helpful. We also have a couple practice tests and samples that and more are coming in the next few weeks. And by no means you are obliged to take those. You can also create some of your own, or create a study group with friends and put together a couple of collate documents and then cross-check each other's response. And as I said, we can certainly help, and our evaluators and trainers can do that for you, but you can do that with peers, with colleagues, is practicing. So how do you turn something which is again, like a hodgepodge, like a mix and match of different background documents, to turn that into a sensible essay on that basis? And this is a skill. So writing skill is a skill, meaning it has to be practiced. It's not like a memorization, so whether you know or whether you don't know some very concrete thing about financial accounting. That's a knowledge issue. Here, it's your writing skills that you need to work on. So that requires regular practice, but it also requires understanding the methodology of it. Because simply writing a lot, well, it will teach you stuff, but if you do it in a more deliberate, more targeted, more conscious way, it's going to help you improve more. Maybe one or two more questions, and then we cover the rest, which is, yeah, when do you think the test will be? I already answered that. When starts the CBT test, right? Before uploading the documents. And again, based on my previous theory and my previous guesses, I don't think it's going to happen before mid-late October, but again, it's just my guess at this point. But they will communicate it to you at least 4 weeks, more often 6 weeks in advance. So you will have enough notice that the exams are coming. And then if we speak English and French equally good, what's better strategically for the computer-based tests? I give you my layman's answer. Perhaps English, because English is a bit more, it's a bit shorter language, in the sense that the way English expresses itself, or as a language, tends to be more pointed and more to the point and more succinct. French tends to be more verbose, and grammar is more complicated. With no offense, I mean, it's just my observations, being the speaker of both languages. If you have equal notion of both languages, I probably would go for English. And again, that's just my take. Feel free to disagree. Any tips on preparing for field-related multiple choice quiz? Here, a quick commercial pitch, but more than that, hopefully a quick helpful pitch is we have a lot of questions coming in the next few weeks before the end of August for each of the 3 fields. So we have our subject matter experts already working on it and creating new ones and looking at all the different factors. So we'll have a large collection of field-related multiple choice questions on our website before the end of August. So that's going to be up, and all of you will be notified when we have that ready. But besides that, we're also going to have and put it out freely resources of different websites and other online resources that you can go to that we consider as relevant and helpful for each of the 3 fields. So watch out for those. And right, I see many other questions are coming in. I'll try to look at some of those. Practice is do they say mother of success? I don't know if that's an expression, probably not. But the point is, do take it seriously. So you need to practice regularly, whether it's 10 to 12 weeks, whether it's 1 month intense, look at it as sports prep. It's really something that you need to do on a regular basis, and not just a spurt or sprint at the very end of the exam period or in the run up to the exam. Prepare, whether it's 1 hour per day. That's, I know, a little ambitious, but again, regularity and taking it seriously is really fundamental. Learning the test methodology, I cannot emphasize that enough. So for all of these tests, and I already hinted at it before, there is a methodology. There is a way to write better. There's a way to find the correct answer for the abstract, formula, or numerical quicker. And there is certainly a way, or at least a process or a method, to brush up on your field-specific knowledge, to learn it systematically of what are you going to revise and make sure that you remember. And staying persistent, not going very as a roller coaster, but consistently preparing and having a plan. And by the way, happy to let you know, so we have a preparation planner tool on our website. It's a bit experimental at this point, but you look for it. It's completely free. You input which exam you're preparing for, and we are refining it in the next couple of weeks. But hopefully that can guide you and orientate you as to what sort of preparation you want to put forward or devise. And it breaks it down according to the time available until your exam. So you can input what's your strength or weakness, and you can say, okay, how much time there is until the exam, and it gives you a plan of what to focus on in different weeks or days or time periods. Simulations, certainly very helpful. So there we go. Here's our exam preparation planner. As I said, it's experimental, but there's the link, but you can find it on the website. And we are refining it. We're making it more robust, but give us feedback. Let us know if this is helpful to you or what else you might want to see in it, and then we can adapt it. And then the webinars, we have lots of webinars available already, which some are free, some are paid, and more coming up, live ones with instructor-led. And then there are a lot of articles and other resources that we put on the website, so feel free to check those out. My book, The Ultimate You Test Book, the Assistant Edition, just came out, so that's in the bookstores as we speak, or shortly in the next few days. So that's also available. And then if you are on Facebook, feel free to, and you're encouraged to join those communities, because there are those groups dedicated for those exams, for rumors, for best practices, for resources, for anything that is related to the exams. And then, as I said before, we are working very hard on putting out the field-related multiple choice quizzes for each of the 3 areas, and that should be available before the end of the month. And as soon as they are ready, we're going to let you know. And in that spirit, we are going to offer 20% off of all those tests and all those packages, which normally we put here the code, but since those tests are not yet available and the code is usually time limited, we decided we're going to let you know when the package is available. So it's going to be of more use to you when those field-specific tests are ready to be purchased. And then the 20% off, the code that gives you that discount, will be communicated. So with that, we have 2 full minutes left, and before we sign off, and I thank all the team to make it available, I see 1 or 2 questions that are still open. I'll try to answer those. So how can you test the level C1 of first language? That's an important question. Your linguistic knowledge is not tested. There's no language test in any shape or form. You basically need to use your linguistic skills. So going back to my earlier silly example of me speaking Estonian, which unfortunately I don't, but if I were to choose that language, there's no certificate or other that I would need to show to anyone, because the tests will be in that language. And if I don't understand a single word, well, most likely I don't qualify as a person speaking on a C1 level. So there's no linguistic test in that form. All right, how do you know which supporting documents to upload? That's going to be in your EPSO profile. So they will tell you what exactly you need to upload. Whatever proves your underlying qualification and whatever proves your relevant work experience would need to be uploaded in some form. So make sure that you get those documents so you are ready to submit those. And then in the last minute, I'm looking at what other question I may have left unanswered. There are many questions about the dates. Does the former work experience in the field enter into account for the salary? So basically, person asking if your work experience has an impact on your salary. It has some impact. It doesn't have a huge impact, but it has some impact, because if you recall at the salary calculator, there is this field called step. So there, which step you are placed into depends on your pre-existing work experience. But again, it's more of a minor adjustment, because the biggest determining factor on your salary is that it's an AST3. So if it was 85 or 89, that would have the biggest impact. So that's the framework that determines, and there are slight adjustments in the salary based on your work experience at the time of recruitment. All right, I think this is where we're going to stop, and I'll look at the questions. If there's anything else that we can still answer, we'll find a way to do that. And as I said, we're going to follow up with the discount code as soon as those packages are ready. And thank you so much. And thank to Zsófi and Balázs and everyone and Rita who put this all together and made today's webinar possible. And thank you to everyone for spending your past 1 hour with us to learn about the AST3. We really appreciate that. If we can be helpful in any way, let us know. Send us a message, reach out on social media. We are happy to help. And I wish you good luck. I wish you success. And hopefully it's going to lend you a wonderful job with the EU institutions. So with that, thank you for being here and hope to continue.